There's a common and sensationalized myth about greatness that is pervasive, and it's encapsulated in part of this post right here. The part that says, some are born with fire in their eyes. They're all in all the time. Now, this sounds great, and perhaps it brings to mind imagery of someone who is single-minded about their activity. Maybe they make all of these sacrifices in their life. They leave everything else behind so they can pursue this one thing with devout obsession to try to be the best. There's only one problem with this. It's just not how performance or greatness actually works. Take, for instance, the speed skater Niels van der Poel, double gold medalist at the 2022 Olympics in Beijing in both the 10K and the 5K. Brutal endurance speed skating events. Not only did he win gold, he also shattered the world record. So it is not a stretch to say that Niels van der Poel is by far the greatest speed skater to ever step foot on the planet, and he likely will be for quite some time. What's interesting about van der Poel's story, about 3 years before the games, he was underperforming. At regional and national competitions, he just wasn't doing as well as he ought to have been. And even in big training days, he felt like he wasn't getting the best out of himself. So he did what any elite world-class athlete would do. He started by uncovering all the physical stones. He had blood work done. He had his saliva and hormone ratios tested. He had his muscle size and strength tested, and on and on and on. And yet they found nothing. So next, van der Poel said, maybe this is not something with my body, maybe this is something with my mind. And he realized that when he was going into the oval to compete or for big training days, he had a lot of fear he was carrying with him. So he asked himself, why do I have this fear? And he identified that his entire identity, all of his self-worth and meaning, was tied up in being a speed skater. To quote that dude on Instagram, he was all in all the time. There was no Niels van der Poel outside of Niels van der Poel, the speed skater. And that, in many ways, made him fragile. Because he knows that in that sport, you are one misstep, one ill-timed injury or sickness away from the dream going poof and evaporating. So van der Poel had all of this fear, and he didn't perform well with this fear. So he did something that is pretty unprecedented for a world-class performer. He took a normal weekend. So starting Friday afternoon to Monday morning, Niels van der Poel absolutely did nothing related to the sport of speed skating. He didn't train. He didn't get quote-unquote recovery. No, he lived like a normal person. He went out for pizza and beers with friends. He got involved in local community events. He started going on hikes. Essentially, he developed other areas of his life that brought him joy and meaning outside of speed skating. And as a result, he says, he was able to shed so much of the fear that was holding him back. When he went to skate in the Olympics, where he shattered the world record, van der Poel said that he was skating from a place of freedom, not fear. And he attributed that to diversifying his sense of identity, to not being all in all the time, to finding other sources of meaning and value in his life. Now, the metaphor that I've come to use for this is to view identity like a house. If you've got a house that only has one room in it, and that one room catches fire or floods, you're in for a really disorienting experience. You're going to have to move out of your house altogether. Whereas if you've got an identity house that has multiple rooms in it, and one room catches fire or floods, you can go take refuge in the other rooms while you work on fixing the fire, fixing the flood. You don't have to move out of your house completely. So in van der Poel's house, it was a one-bedroom house, and the only room was speed skater room. And what he did was he added these other rooms to his identity house. Now, van der Poel wasn't quote-unquote balanced. Okay? He spent the vast majority of his time, even so, in the speed skater room. It's just that he had these other components of his identity that he could lean into when he needed to as well. And this is a model that all of us can follow. Now, it's not just speed skating, and it's not just athletes. I want to quote from a study that was called Arts Foster Scientific Success, Avocations of Nobel National Academy Royal Society in Sigma Psi Members. And the study was done by Robert Root Bernstein at Michigan State University in 2008. It was published in the Journal of Psychology of Science and Technology. And what Bernstein found is that when you look at Nobel Academy members and winners of other prestigious awards in the sciences, many of them have hobbies outside of the sciences. They do other things. They have other rooms in their identity house. And not only does this make them less fragile, it actually makes them better scientists because they are able to draw from these other areas and bring it into the research. They're able to think more creatively. They're able to have more lightheartedness, all of which helps you stay in the game for a long period of time and do good science. I want to pull a quote about this line of research from one of my good friend's book, Range, Dave Epstein. Dave writes, compared to other scientists, Nobel laureates are at least 22 times more likely to partake as an amateur actor, dancer, magician, or other type of performer. Nationally recognized scientists are much more likely than other scientists to be musicians, sculptors, painters, printmakers, woodmakers, mechanics, electronic tinkers, glass blowers, poets, or writers of both fiction and non-fiction. And again, Nobel laureates are far more likely still. So there's two myths. The first is that you've got to be all in or else. And what I'm here to tell you, what Niels Vanderpool is here to tell you, what the research is here to tell you, is actually that makes you fragile. That puts so much pressure on yourself because if that thing that you're all in all the time on doesn't go your way, then you're screwed. You have no sense of self. You have no identity. There's research that shows that individuals that fuse their identity too closely with their main pursuits, not only do they put out nonsense Instagram posts, but they're also far more likely to cheat and engage in fraud. Why? Again, because they cannot fail. Their entire identity is on the line. Nobody performs well under those circumstances. The second part of this myth is that even if you could somehow perform well under those circumstances for a long period of time, it would not make you better. It might make you worse at what you do. Because too much of a single-minded focus on one thing forever degrades performance. It doesn't help it. We need outside influences. We are not meant to be single-room houses. We are meant to have multiple rooms in our identity house. I'll bring it home to myself. I have a couple main rooms in my identity house, and by no means am I perfect. I have my family room, where I'm a husband and a father. I have my craft room, where I'm a writer. I have my athlete room, where I powerlift. And then I have my friend and community member room. Now, I don't spend equal proportions of time in all of these rooms. There are different seasons of my life where I spend different proportion of time in each of those rooms. Nobody here is trying to be quote unquote balanced, as I said earlier. But what's interesting and what I aspire toward and what I challenge you to think about is that when I look at individuals who have succeeded, who are towards the end of their careers and who have done it the right way, who have had good objective performance but also good internal fulfillment, I find a really interesting pattern. When you zoom in on any one moment of their life, they do not look very balanced at all. They look like they're spending the vast majority of their time in one room of the identity house, maybe two. But when you zoom out and you look across their life, they actually look quite balanced. So they have different seasons for pursuing different priorities. It can help to think of it like this. If you have an identity house with, let's say, 4 or 5 rooms in it, it doesn't mean that we need to spend the same amount of time in each room. I said that. What it means is that you just don't want to let any other rooms get moldy because you don't know when you're going to need them. So if you're prioritizing the athlete room in your identity house and the family room, make sure you stay in just enough touch with the friend and artist room so that you can come back to it when you need to. You can think of it like a minimum effective dose for time spent in each core room of your identity house. The other nice thing about this construct is that much like an actual house, you can renovate and remodel. You can make additions over time, and you can take away rooms as you go too. Because identity is this ever-evolving thing. And at the base of our identity house, what doesn't change are core values. But on top of those core values, we can become, and most of us will become, different people doing different things at different phases of our life. So we're not all in all the time. Nobody's all in all the time. It's not a path to well-being, and it's not a path to performance. This doesn't mean that we should all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and be perfectly balanced, because I've yet to meet anybody that can do that and is truly happy. What it means is that if we're going to be all in, we can't be all in all the time. We need to pick our spots, and we need to make sure that we diversify our sense of identity and our sense of self enough that when things change, we can go into other areas of ourself to seek meaning, to seek stability, to seek strength. That's what being a rock solid performer is all about.